Snow fell heavy enough to erase footprints and bury fear beneath silence. Somewhere deep in the Montana high country, a lone Navy SEAL lay hidden in the trees. Mission compromised, team gone, radio dead. Enemy patrols moved closer with every minute. Breath turned to ice. Blood slowed in the cold. No air support, no extraction, no margin for error. Then a sound cut through the storm. Not a voice, a low growl beside her. A German Shepherd K9, eyes locked forward, body tense, waiting for her command. Together, they began moving. One wounded operator, one dog trained to survive what humans could not. They didn't need to win the night. They only needed to survive until dawn. The forest stretched for miles. Snowfall had lasted 12 straight hours. Winds cut through the ridge lines at 35 knots. Visibility collapsed to less than 100 meters as patrol lights swept the trees. Every step could give them away. Every pause could be their last. She checked her watch. 0451 hours. Dawn was still coming. Before we dive into this powerful story, take a moment to comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. Snow began falling just outside Helena, Montana. Quiet at first, then heavier by the minute, the kind of snow that swallowed sound and erased distance. The city lights faded quickly behind the transport convoy as it climbed into the northern forest, leaving behind roads, signals, and anything that felt like certainty. Wind threaded through the pines like a warning that arrived too late. The storm had not been forecast this early. Sarah Caldwell noticed that immediately. She was 32 years old, 5'8", lean rather than muscular, built for endurance instead of power. Her dark hair was pulled tight under her helmet, not a strand loose. Her face carried the calm lines of someone trained to make decisions under pressure, but there was a hardness in her eyes that had not been there when she first enlisted. Something had changed her years ago, something she never spoke about. Loss did that. So did betrayal. Sarah was a Navy SEAL intelligence operator, not a sniper, not a breacher. She specialized in infiltration, retrieval, and exfiltration. The quiet work meant to leave no echo behind. Tonight's mission was supposed to be exactly that. Retrieve data. Get out. No contact. Behind her moved the rest of the team, shadows between trees. 8 operators total, dressed in winter camouflage, weapons suppressed, movements disciplined and economical. They had trained together for months, trusted each other with the kind of trust that only formed when lives depended on it. At the rear of the formation padded another presence. The German Shepherd K9 assigned to Sarah was named Rex. He was 3 years old, still young for a working dog, with a thick black and tan coat already dusted white by the snow. His build was athletic, powerful but not bulky, designed for speed and stamina. His ears stood tall and alert, amber eyes constantly scanning, missing nothing. Rex moved with quiet confidence, paws landing softly even on frozen ground. Sarah did not look back at him. She never did. To her, Rex was a tool, an asset, a necessary addition to the mission profile, nothing more. She respected his training, acknowledged his usefulness, but she did not bond with him. Bonding made loss harder. She had learned that lesson once, the hard way, during training years earlier when a K9 she had worked near was killed in a live fire accident. Since then, she kept distance, emotional distance, professional distance. 2 weeks was not enough time to change that. The objective lay 3 kilometers ahead, a small, hidden data relay station disguised as a weather monitoring outpost buried deep in the forest. Satellite intelligence suggested minimal security. A quick grab. They moved fast. Too fast. The first sign that something was wrong came when Rex stopped. Not froze, not hesitated. Stopped. Sarah felt the leash go taut in her gloved hand. She turned slightly, irritation flaring before training suppressed it. Rex's body was rigid, head low, ears forward, nostrils flaring as he tasted the air. "What is it?" she whispered, more out of habit than expectation. Rex did not look at her. He growled. A flare burst overhead. White light exploded through the trees, reflecting off the snow, turning night into blinding day. The forest erupted in sound automatic fire ripping from multiple directions, rounds snapping through branches, bark exploding into splinters. "Contact! Contact!" someone shouted. The team scattered instantly. diving for cover. Sarah hit the ground hard, the impact knocking air from her lungs. Rex stayed low beside her, body pressed close, a living shield of muscle and instinct. The ambush was perfect. Enemy fighters opened fire from elevated positions, crossfire locking the clearing down in seconds. This was no light security. This was prepared, deliberate. Someone had known they were coming. Sarah crawled behind a fallen log, heart pounding, mind racing. She keyed her radio. Nothing. Static. She tried again. Still nothing. A round struck the tree inches from her head, spraying snow and wood. She rolled, dragging Rex with her, and felt a sharp pain flare in her left thigh. Not crippling, but warm blood soaked into her gear instantly. "Sarah, move!" a teammate yelled from somewhere to her right. She tried to respond, but another explosion cut the air. Smoke and snow mixed into a choking cloud. Visibility dropped to nothing. Shouts turned to echoes, then disappeared altogether. The formation broke. This was not a fight they could win. Sarah pushed herself up, ignoring the pain, and ran. Rex stayed with her without command, matching her stride, guiding her instinctively toward thicker cover. They plunged into the trees as gunfire followed, bullets cracking through branches behind them. She ran until her lungs burned and her vision blurred. Then she fell, hard. She hit a slope and rolled, momentum carrying her down into a shallow ravine. Snow filled her mouth. She lay still, chest heaving, listening. Silence, not safety, just absence of sound. Rex stood over her, teeth bared, body tense, watching the tree line above. Snow clung to his fur, melting into dark streaks. One ear twitched constantly, tracking distant movement. Sarah forced herself to sit up. Her leg throbbed, but she could still move. She reached for her radio again. The screen flickered once, then went dark. Battery dead. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting the surge of panic. Alone, injured, cut off, deep in hostile territory. This was how operators died. A memory surfaced unbidden. Training, years ago. An instructor's voice sharp in her ear. "Never underestimate your K9. He sees what you don't, smells what you can't. Trust him or don't bring him at all." She had nodded back then, understood the words, never believed them. Rex moved closer, pressing his body against her side, sharing warmth. He made a low sound, not a growl this time, but something softer, steady, comforting. Sarah exhaled slowly. Then she heard it. Voices, distant, foreign, and beneath them the unmistakable sound of dogs. Enemy tracking dogs. Her grip tightened on her rifle. She scanned the ravine. No clear escape. Snowfall thickened, wind howling through the trees, dropping the temperature fast. Frost crept into her gloves. Rex turned his head toward the sound, then back to her. For the first time since they'd met, Sarah met his eyes. They were calm, focused, waiting. Her watch glowed faintly. 4:02 hours. Dawn was still far away. The dogs were getting closer. Sarah swallowed, heart hammering, and whispered the words she had never planned to say. "Okay, partner." Rex's tail flicked once. Then he turned and began to move. The forest closed around them as soon as they left the ravine. Pines stood packed so tightly their branches stitched the sky into narrow strips of moving gray. Snow thickened underfoot, deeper here, untouched, swallowing sound and distance alike. Sarah Caldwell moved with a limp she refused to acknowledge, her breathing measured, her posture controlled despite the pain burning through her thigh. She was tall and spare, built for endurance, her movements economical even now. Fear sat in her chest, heavy and cold, but it no longer ran the show. Focus did. Rex led. He did not wait for commands. He did not look back. His body language was decisive, confident, tail low, head forward, tracking a route Sarah could not see. The dog's coat was already crusted with ice, breath puffing steady in the cold. 3 years old, trained for detection and pursuit, Rex moved as if the forest belonged to him. Sarah followed, because there was nothing else to follow. They left the slope and pushed deeper into old-growth timber where the trees were wider and the ground uneven. Satellite maps meant nothing here. Fallen trunks crisscrossed the forest floor, buried under snow that hid gaps and deadfalls. A wrong step could break an ankle. A pause could be fatal. Behind them, the sounds grew clearer. Voices, sharp and clipped. Commands passed hand to hand. The enemy was organizing now, not chasing blindly anymore. They were establishing a sweep. Sarah crouched behind a cedar and listened. She could hear dogs now, low and purposeful, not barking, not excited. Trained animals. Trackers. Her jaw tightened. Rex stopped abruptly and turned, meeting her eyes. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his gaze, the calculation. He lowered his head and moved sideways, cutting across the natural slope instead of following it, away from the path that made sense. Sarah hesitated for half a second. Every instinct drilled into her said to move downhill, to find water, to mask scent. Every lesson said terrain was leverage. Rex ignored all of it. She went anyway. The forest grew denser. Branches clawed at her gear. Snow slid down her collar, icy against her skin. The pain in her leg worsened, each step a reminder that she was no longer operating at full capacity. She checked her watch. 4:17 hours. Dawn was still a promise, distant and fragile. Rex slowed, then veered sharply left, weaving through a cluster of young pines. Sarah followed, breath fogging, vision narrowing. That was when she noticed it. The dog paused briefly and lifted his leg. Marking. Sarah frowned. Marking a trail made no sense. It was how trackers followed, how dogs were followed. She reached for the leash instinctively, then stopped herself. Rex moved on immediately, not waiting, not lingering. Minutes later, he did it again, and again. Sarah's mind clicked. He wasn't marking a path to return. He was painting a false one, laying a scent line that crossed and recrossed itself, doubling back, climbing over rocks, then cutting through frozen water where scent would disappear entirely. A maze. She had been taught this tactic once, briefly, in a classroom lecture she barely remembered. Counter-tracking through controlled scent dispersal. Advanced K9 behavior. No handler command required. A quiet realization settled in her chest, heavier than fear. She didn't know how to do this. He did. They reached a narrow creek, frozen solid except for a thin, dark ribbon of moving water at its center. Rex stepped onto the ice without hesitation, crossing diagonally, then walked straight down the middle of the creek bed for nearly 20 meters before climbing out on the far side. Sarah followed, heart hammering, boots slipping. Cold seeped instantly into her soles. The water masked their trail completely. When they reached the opposite bank, Rex shook once and moved on. Behind them, the dogs' voices changed. Confusion replaced certainty. Handlers shouted. Commands overlapped. The sweep faltered, if only briefly. Sarah allowed herself one slow breath. She leaned against a tree and slid down into a crouch, rifle across her knees. Her hands trembled, not from cold alone. Adrenaline burned through her veins, sharp and bright. This was no longer a mission. This was survival. She looked at Rex again, really looked this time. At the scars barely visible beneath his fur, old training marks. At the calm way he scanned the forest, ears flicking, muscles coiled but not tense. He was not afraid. Not because he didn't understand danger, but because he understood his role within it. "Okay," she whispered, voice rough. "I'm with you." Rex's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but he did not look back. He simply moved on, slower now, choosing a path that kept them off ridgelines and away from open ground. The storm intensified, wind threading through the trees, dragging temperature down with it. Snow began to fall harder, thicker, a curtain that worked for and against them. Sarah's thoughts shifted, no longer to extraction points or contingency plans, no longer to radio calls or air support. She focused on the next 10 meters, the next breath, the placement of her foot. She adjusted her pace to Rex's without thinking, matching his rhythm. Hours ago, she had been a SEAL executing a precision task. Now she was a wounded woman learning to survive because an animal knew how. They moved deeper into the forest, past any terrain Sarah recognized. The night stretched on, long and heavy. Enemy voices faded, then reappeared, distant but persistent. The sweep widened. They were being hunted methodically now, not chased. Rex stopped suddenly and crouched, body low. Sarah froze. Through the trees ahead, faint light flickered. Headlamps. A patrol line moving perpendicular to their path, slow and careful. 5 men, bundled in winter gear, rifles slung ready. One of them held a leash attached to a dark shape Sarah recognized instantly, another tracking dog. The handler was a broad-shouldered man, average height, face obscured by frost and a hood, movements controlled and professional. He trusted his dog. He trusted the process. Rex did not move. Sarah's heart hammered so loud she was sure it would give them away. She considered raising her rifle, then dismissed it instantly. One shot would bring everything down on them. Rex turned his head slightly and nudged her knee with his nose. Then he moved. Not forward. Back. And then sideways, slipping into a shallow depression filled with snow-laden brush. He pressed himself flat, eyes locked on the patrol. Sarah followed, breath shallow, body shaking from strain as much as fear. The patrol passed within 20 meters. The tracking dog lifted its head, confused, pulling slightly on the leash. The handler corrected it sharply. The dog whined, uncertain. Rex did not growl. He did not move. He waited. When the patrol moved on, Rex stayed still for a full minute more, then another. Only when the forest swallowed their sounds entirely did he rise and continue, choosing a route that bent away from danger like water flowing around stone. Sarah followed without question now. She no longer thought of Rex as equipment. She did not think of him as property or asset. She thought of him as guide, as protector, as the reason she was still alive. The fear was still there, coiled and ready, but it no longer owned her. It sharpened her focus instead of breaking it. Her watch glowed faintly again. 4:39 hours. Dawn was closer, but the forest was deeper, and there was still no way back. The cold found her wound before the pain did. It crept in slow and deliberate, turning the dull burn in Sarah Caldwell's thigh into something heavier, deeper, as if the muscle itself were stiffening around the injury. Her pace faltered, not enough to stop, but enough to matter. In terrain like this, weakness announced itself. Sarah was not a large woman, but she was resilient, built long and lean, trained to move under weight and stress. Tonight, that training was being tested in ways no exercise ever had. Blood loss had slowed. That was good. But the cold was working against her now, pulling heat from her body with every step. She could no longer run, not fast, not far. Rex noticed before she admitted it. He slowed without command, matching her shortened stride. Every few meters he paused, scanning back the way they'd come, ears flicking, nose tasting the air. The enemy voices had grown closer again, more organized. The sweep was tightening. Whoever led them had adjusted, understood they were dealing with a disciplined evasion, not a panicked retreat. Sarah slipped on a buried root and dropped hard to one knee. The pain finally broke through, sharp and bright, stealing her breath. She clenched her teeth, refusing to cry out. Her gloved hand pressed instinctively against the wound, coming away damp and cold. Rex was at her side instantly. He nudged her shoulder, then her face, insistently. When she didn't rise, he stepped around her and positioned himself between her and the wind, broad chest blocking the worst of it. Snow piled against his flank, melting into his fur. He stood still, solid, a living barrier. Sarah leaned back against a rock face she hadn't noticed before. A narrow fissure split the stone, just wide enough to shelter them from the wind. She dragged herself into it, muscles screaming, and Rex followed, turning twice before settling down beside her. He pressed his body along her injured leg, heat seeping through layers of fabric. She hadn't told him to do that. She stared at him, breath fogging, chest rising and falling unevenly. His eyes met hers briefly, calm and steady, then shifted back to the forest beyond the rocks. Guarding. Something inside her shifted. Her mind drifted backward, uninvited. A training field years ago, dry and bright, dust instead of snow. She'd been younger then, harder in a different way, more closed off. They'd been running live fire exercises with K9 support, practicing breach scenarios. One of the dogs, a Belgian Malinois named Jax, had bolted unexpectedly when a flashbang detonated too close. A split-second mistake. A ricochet. The sound afterward had been wrong, too final. She remembered the handler screaming, dropping to his knees in the dirt, hands shaking as he tried to hold together what couldn't be held. Sarah had stood frozen, rifle lowered, watching life leave an animal that had trusted humans completely. After that, she never let herself connect. Tools could be replaced, partners could not. Sarah exhaled slowly and reached up with trembling fingers. She unclipped the small fabric insignia from her vest, the subdued trident and eagle that marked her as SEAL. The emblem was worn soft at the edges, carried through deployments and dust and salt. She hesitated only a second. Then she tied it carefully around Rex's collar. Her hands were clumsy from cold, but she made it work. "There," she whispered, voice hoarse. "You're not equipment." Rex turned his head at the sound of her voice. For a moment his expression changed, something softer flickering behind the focus. His tail thumped once, low and quiet, against the rock. They rested only minutes. Too long and they'd freeze. Too short and she wouldn't make it another kilometer. Rex rose first, ears snapping forward. He moved to the edge of the fissure and sniffed, then returned, pressing his nose against her knee. A question. Sarah forced herself up, using the rock for leverage. The leg protested but held. She nodded once. "Okay." They moved again, slower now, the forest opening briefly into a shallow basin of snow and scrub. Moonlight reflected off the ground, turning it into a pale, exposed sheet. Sarah felt the vulnerability instantly. No cover, no concealment. Rex stopped. He lifted his head, eyes fixed ahead, then angled slightly right, towards something barely visible through the trees. A path. Not a trail in the usual sense, but a faint depression in the snow, too straight to be natural. The remains of an old patrol route, long abandoned, probably cut decades ago and forgotten when borders shifted and missions changed. Snow had softened it, but it was still there. Escape. Sarah's pulse quickened, then slowed as reality set in. To reach it, they would have to cross open ground. The voices behind them were closer now, dogs barking, sharper, more certain. The trackers were picking up fragments of scent again, narrowing options. If they stayed hidden, they'd be found. If they crossed, they'd be seen. Rex looked back at her, eyes intent, waiting. Trust, then. She tightened her grip on her rifle and stepped forward. They moved together, crossing the basin in a crouch, every movement deliberate. The wind howled across the open space, dragging snow sideways, blinding and blessing them at once. Halfway across, a shout rang out behind them. A beam of light swept the trees, then the clearing. Rex broke into a sprint. Sarah followed as best she could, leg burning, lungs on fire. She stumbled once, caught herself, kept moving. The patrol route rose slightly, offering cover in its shallow trench. Rex dove into it first, then turned, teeth closing gently on the back of her sleeve, pulling her the last few feet. They collapsed together, hidden once more. The enemy reached the basin moments later. Lights scanned, voices tense. Dogs strained at their leashes, confused by crossing scents and disrupted trails. Someone cursed. Orders were barked. The sweep shifted again, redirected. Rex stayed still, pressed close, breathing slow and controlled. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, forehead resting against the cold earth. She wasn't alone anymore. Not really. Her watch glowed faintly in the darkness. 04:58 hours. The night was thinning. The abandoned patrol route did not lead to safety. It led them straight into the edge of enemy control. Sarah Caldwell realized it the moment the forest thinned and the ground began to slope gently downward. The trees here were trimmed unnaturally, branches cut back to create lines of sight. Snow lay flatter, disturbed by boot prints that did not belong to her or Rex. This was not wilderness anymore. This was managed terrain. Someone owned this ground. Sarah slowed, shoulders tight beneath her pack. Her face, pale beneath windburn and frost, showed strain now, but not panic. She had always been this way, under pressure, quiet, internal emotions locked behind discipline forged early in her career. Years ago, an intelligence failure had cost her a teammate during an extraction gone wrong. Since then, she trusted plans more than people, procedures more than instinct. Tonight, both were failing her. Rex halted at the edge of a shallow tree line, body low, ears pricked. The faint glow of headlamps moved between distant trunks. Enemy patrols, 3, maybe 4 elements, spaced carefully. They weren't rushing anymore. They were sealing corridors, controlling movement, forcing whatever they hunted into predictable routes. Sarah studied the pattern, mind reverting automatically to training doctrine. Avoid contact, freeze, let them pass, move laterally. It was textbook. Rex ignored the book. He turned away from the patrol route and padded several meters off to the right into thicker brush. Then he stopped and deliberately snapped a branch with his paw. The sound cracked loud in the cold. Sarah's breath caught, her muscles tensed, ready to move, to run, to fight if necessary. She raised her rifle halfway, then Rex barked. Not a warning bark, not a challenge. A sharp, abrupt sound followed by movement. He bolted deeper into the trees, deliberately noisy, crashing through brush, leaving a clear, careless trail behind him. No, she whispered, panic surging. Rex! Lights swung instantly, voices rose, commands barked. The patrol shifted, pulling toward the sound. Dogs strained against leashes, eager, convinced. Rex disappeared into darkness. For a heartbeat, Sarah froze. Training screamed at her to move the opposite direction, to exploit the distraction, to save herself. That was the logic drilled into her bones. The mission over the man. Survival over sentiment. She took one step, then stopped. The insignia tied around Rex's collar flashed in her mind. Partner. She turned and moved the way Rex had indicated earlier, low and fast, slipping through gaps opened by his sacrifice. Snow swallowed her steps. Her leg protested sharply, but she bit it down, breathing through clenched teeth. She crossed the controlled zone unseen, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give her away. When she reached cover again, the forest quieted unnaturally. Too quiet. Minutes passed, then more. Rex did not return. Sarah crouched behind a rock outcrop, shaking now, not from cold but from something far worse. She scanned the darkness, listening. Distant shouts, dogs barking further away. A shot cracked, muffled by snow. Her chest tightened painfully. She told herself Rex was trained for this. He knew how to evade. He would circle back. But doubt crept in, corrosive and sharp. She had let him go alone. Another voice rose nearby, closer than before. Sarah pressed herself flatter against the rock, barely breathing. 2 enemy soldiers moved into view, winter gear layered thick, faces hidden behind masks. One was tall and broad, movements heavy and confident. The other slimmer, head constantly swiveling, nervous energy in his posture. Neither noticed her. A sudden yelp cut through the trees. Rex! Sarah moved without thinking. She rose and ran toward the sound, abandoning concealment, abandoning caution. Branches tore at her gear. Her legs screamed in protest. She didn't slow. She found them in a small clearing. Rex lay on his side, struggling to rise. Blood darkened the snow near his shoulder, where a fragment of metal had torn through fur and muscle. Not deep, but enough. Nearby, one of the enemy soldiers lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. The other was backing away, weapon raised, eyes wide. Sarah didn't hesitate. 2 controlled shots. The soldier dropped. Silence fell, broken only by Rex's labored breathing. She dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she assessed the wound. It wasn't fatal, painful, bleeding, but survivable. She pressed a bandage from her kit against it, fingers firm despite the tremor in her arms. "I've got you," she whispered, voice breaking despite herself. "I've got you." Rex whined softly, then stilled as she worked. His eyes stayed on her face, trusting completely. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Voices, closer now. They'd heard the shots. Sarah finished securing the bandage and did something she had never done before. She slid her rifle off her shoulder and set it aside, then unclipped her heavy pack, letting it drop into the snow. Extra ammunition, equipment, weight, control. She left it all behind. She lifted Rex's head gently, supporting his injured side, and helped him to his feet. He leaned into her, limping but determined. They moved together, slower but quieter now, slipping away before the patrol reached the clearing. Snow fell harder, wind rising, masking sound, blurring tracks. The forest accepted them again. When they finally stopped, hidden deep among clustered firs, Sarah leaned her forehead against Rex's, breath ragged. She understood something then that years of training had never taught her. Survival wasn't about executing doctrine perfectly. It was about choosing who mattered. Her watch glowed faintly. 5:14 hours. They were still alive, still together, and deeper than ever inside enemy lines. Exhaustion settled into Sarah Caldwell's bones like wet cement. It was no longer sharp or dramatic, it was dull, total, the kind that hollowed a person out and left only habit behind. Her breath came shallow now, each inhale burning her lungs, each exhale fogging the air in front of her face. She was tall and lean, built for endurance, but endurance had limits. The night had taken most of hers. Rex felt it too. The German shepherd's stride shortened, his injured shoulder stiffening despite the field dressing Sarah had wrapped tight. Blood had stopped flowing, but the cold punished the wound relentlessly. His coat was heavy with snow, ice clinging to the darker fur along his spine. Still, his eyes remained alert. 3 years old, trained for war, but never meant to carry a human's fate alone, he stayed close to Sarah's left side, matching her faltering pace. The forest thinned as they climbed. Trees grew shorter, bent by wind and years of snow load. The terrain angled upward, rocky beneath the snow crust. Somewhere far behind them, enemy movement continued, voices drifting faintly through the timber. They were still being hunted, but the urgency had shifted. This was containment now. The enemy believed time was on their side. Sarah checked her watch again. 5:32 hours. The sky had changed. It was no longer black. A pale, uncertain gray seeped into the clouds, flattening shadows, erasing the stars. Dawn was approaching, but it had not arrived. Worse, the weather had closed in harder. Wind gusts screamed across the ridgeline, driving snow sideways, grounding anything with rotors or wings. If there was air support inbound, it would not reach them yet. Rex paused, lifted his head, and turned slightly toward a narrow spine of rock rising ahead. It wasn't the highest point in the area, but it was defensible, partially shielded from the wind by jagged stone. More importantly, it had line of sight. Sarah understood immediately. A last signal. They climbed slowly, carefully. Sarah slipped twice, catching herself on frozen stone, palms scraping raw beneath her gloves. Her leg trembled with each step, muscles near failure. Rex climbed ahead, choosing footholds instinctively, pausing whenever she faltered. At the crest, he stopped and stood guard while she collapsed to one knee, chest heaving. She pulled the emergency beacon from her remaining gear. It was small, battered, its casing scratched and cold. One transmission left. After that, it would be nothing but a light in the dark. She hesitated. Sending the signal would be an invitation. To help, yes, but also to the enemy. Anyone watching this ground would see it. Anyone sweeping the valley would converge. Rex moved closer, pressing his side against her, steadying her. Sarah swallowed hard. Her hands shook as she activated the beacon and angled it skyward. A thin, pulsing signal cut through the storm, invisible but undeniable. Somewhere far away, someone might see it. She leaned back against the rock, eyes closing despite herself. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she bowed her head. "I don't know if anyone's listening," she whispered, voice barely audible over the wind. "I haven't prayed in a long time. I stopped believing it mattered." Her breath caught. "But please," she continued, one hand resting on Rex's neck, fingers buried in his fur. "Not for me, for us. Let us make it." The words felt strange, fragile, but also grounding. She stayed there, eyes closed, counting breaths, while the storm raged around them. Rex growled, low, deep. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Movement flickered below the ridge, shadows resolving into shapes, figures spreading out, methodical, patient. The enemy had seen the signal. They were coming, fanning into a loose arc, rifles raised, dogs straining at leashes. The final ring. Sarah rose unsteadily, pulling Rex closer behind the rock outcrop. She checked her remaining ammunition. Too little. Her body sagged with the weight of that knowledge. There would be no fighting their way out. No running, only holding. Rex stepped forward before she could stop him. He placed himself squarely between Sarah and the advancing figures, stance wide despite the injured shoulder. His lips pulled back, teeth bared, breath fogging in sharp bursts. Snow plastered his face, but his eyes burned bright, locked on the threat. "Rex," Sarah whispered, panic slicing through her exhaustion. "No!" He did not move. A dog handler emerged from the trees below, average height, bundled in winter gear, face tight with concentration. His dog pulled forward, barking now, aggressive, eager. The handler raised a hand, signaling his team to slow. Rex answered with a deep, rolling growl that cut through the storm. Sarah lifted her weapon, hands steady despite everything, but she knew the truth. If they fired, it would be over in seconds. Numbers would overwhelm them. There would be no rescue, no dawn. The enemy closed in cautiously, boots crunching through snow, weapons trained. The wind howled harder, whipping snow into blinding sheets that stung exposed skin. Visibility dropped to meters. Rex held his ground. He did not charge. He did not retreat. He stood. The handler hesitated, unsettled by the dog's posture, by the way the German shepherd did not behave like a cornered animal. This was not fear. This was resolve. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, a quiet, painful release. She had spent years believing strength meant control, meant distance, meant not needing anyone. Tonight had stripped that belief bare. She crouched behind Rex, one hand resting on his back, feeling the tremor there, the strain. He was hurting. He was tired. He stayed anyway. The snow thickened again, wind roaring so loud it drowned out voices. shapes blurred. The enemy slowed, then stopped entirely, unsure, frustrated, unwilling to rush blindly into a storm-choked ridge where visibility betrayed them. Minutes stretched. Sarah's vision dimmed at the edges. Then, faint at first, barely more than a vibration through the rock beneath her, she felt it. A sound that did not belong to the forest. Distant. Mechanical. She lifted her head, hope flaring painfully bright. The enemy heard it too. Rex's ears snapped upward, head turning toward the sound. The handler swore, voice sharp, and began shouting orders, pulling his men back instinctively as the noise grew louder. Somewhere beyond the storm, beyond the ridge, something was coming. Sarah sagged against the rock, strength finally leaving her. She wrapped both arms around Rex's neck, burying her face in his fur as the wind screamed and the snow fell harder than ever. Dawn had not yet come, but it was close. The sound grew from a vibration into a presence. It cut through the storm with a steady, unmistakable rhythm, rotor blades fighting wind and snow, holding altitude by force of will and engineering. Sarah Caldwell lifted her head slowly, disbelief threading through exhaustion. Her face was pale, lips cracked, eyes rimmed red from cold and strain. She had always been composed, controlled, the kind of woman who spoke little and carried responsibility quietly. Now, that composure fractured just enough for hope to slip through. Rex heard it first in full. His ears snapped upright, head turning toward the sound. The growl that had lived in his chest for hours faded into a low, alert rumble. He did not relax. Even now, even with rescue in the air, he stayed between Sarah and the tree line, stance wide, injured shoulder trembling under the effort. Snow clung to his muzzle. His breath came in ragged bursts. The enemy heard it too. Below the ridge, movement faltered. Shouted commands overlapped, then broke apart. The tight arc of soldiers loosened as uncertainty crept in. No one wanted to be caught on exposed ground when aircraft arrived. Rifles lowered slightly. Handlers pulled dogs back, tension running through leashes as the animals resisted, confused by the shifting dominance of sound and scent. The helicopter emerged through the gray like a ghost made of steel. It was a UH-60 Blackhawk, matte dark against the storm. Navigation lights muted. It hovered low, testing the air, then committed, pushing closer despite the wind. The downwash flattened snow into spirals that burned against exposed skin. Sarah squinted, lifting an arm weakly in signal before it dropped again. Rex finally stepped back, pressing into her side. The enemy withdrew without ceremony. No final shots. No last stand. They melted into the forest as they had come, disciplined enough to recognize a lost moment. The ridge belonged to the storm again. The helicopter settled into a hover just off the rock spine. A crew chief leaned out, scanning, face obscured by helmet and goggles. He was a compact man with squared shoulders, movements sharp and practiced, the kind who had done this too many times to be impressed by survival stories. "I see them," he shouted into his mic. "2 souls, 1 K9. Get ready!" A rescue medic rappelled down first, boots hitting rock hard. She was tall and broad-shouldered, late 30s maybe, movements efficient. Her face showed immediate concern when she saw Sarah's posture and Rex's stance. She knelt quickly, hands already assessing, voice calm and firm. "Hey, you're safe now," she said to Sarah, loud enough to cut through the rotor wash. "Stay with me." Sarah nodded faintly. Her body had begun to shake uncontrollably now that the danger had passed. Adrenaline drained, leaving cold and pain behind. She leaned into Rex, arms wrapping around his neck instinctively. He stayed upright, head turning slowly as if still counting threats, eyes never fully leaving the tree line. The second rescuer descended with a stretcher and K9 harness. He was younger, lean, eyes wide at the sight of the dog still standing guard despite the blood matted into his fur. "Damn," he muttered. "He's still working." They moved carefully, respecting Rex's space. The medic checked Sarah's leg, then her hands, her face. She frowned, not alarmed, but serious. "Hypothermia setting in, early stages, blood loss controlled, but barely," she said into her mic. "If we'd been 15 minutes later, we'd be calling this different." Sarah heard the words dimly. The crew moved to lift her, but she shook her head weakly. "Wait," she rasped. "Him first." The medic hesitated. Protocol would say otherwise. Humans first, always. Sarah's grip tightened around Rex's fur. Her voice steadied, surprising even herself. "I'm not going anywhere without him." Rex leaned into her at the sound of her voice, as if he understood the choice being made. The medic studied Sarah's face for a brief moment, then nodded once. "Okay, K9 first." They fitted the harness around Rex gently, mindful of his injured shoulder. He resisted slightly, not afraid, just unwilling to leave Sarah's side. When they lifted him, Sarah reached up and pressed her forehead to his. "Go," she whispered. "I'm right behind you." Rex was guided up into the helicopter, paused scrambling briefly on the metal floor before he was secured. Only then did Sarah allow herself to be lifted. The moment she was inside, the warmth hit her like a wave, and her knees buckled. The medic caught her easily, lowering her onto the stretcher. As the helicopter pulled away from the ridge, Sarah turned her head weakly. Rex lay on the floor nearby, strapped down, chest rising and falling fast but steady. His eyes found hers immediately. He tried to rise again, then stilled when a gloved hand pressed him gently down. They locked eyes. Neither looked away. The flight was short but felt endless. Medics worked quietly, efficiently. Sarah drifted in and out, aware of voices, of hands, of warmth returning painfully to numb fingers. Through it all, Rex remained awake, tracking every movement, until exhaustion finally claimed him too. They landed at a forward medical station just as the sun broke fully through the cloud cover. Daylight flooded the valley in pale gold, transforming the battlefield into something almost peaceful. Snow sparkled. The forest looked untouched. Sarah woke hours later in a narrow cot, wrapped in blankets. Her leg was bandaged properly now, elevated, warm. The medic from earlier stood nearby, checking a chart. "You're stubborn," she said without judgment. "That saved you." Sarah swallowed. "The dog?" The medic smiled. "Your partner's fine. Shoulder wound was superficial. He's resting. Partner." The words settled into place without resistance. 2 days later, paperwork waited. Debriefings, questions, assessments. Sarah answered them all with her usual precision. When the assignment officer asked about reassignment, she didn't hesitate. "I'm requesting continued deployment with my K9, she said calmly. The officer, a grizzled man with silver at his temples, raised an eyebrow. "That's a change." Sarah nodded once. "He's not an asset. He's my partner." Later, as she sat outside the medical tent watching Rex move carefully through the snow, tail wagging despite the bandage, she felt something unfamiliar but welcome settle in her chest. There were battles you won with firepower, and there were battles you survived by placing trust in the right place at the right moment with the right life. This one had been the latter. This story is not really about combat or survival in the wilderness. It is about trust, about the quiet moments when control slips away and we are forced to rely on someone or something beyond ourselves. In life, many of us are trained to believe that strength means doing everything alone. We carry our burdens silently. We hold tightly to plans, routines, and logic, believing that if we stay in control, nothing can hurt us. But sometimes the moment that saves us is not the one we planned for. Sometimes help comes through an unexpected companion, a simple act of loyalty, or a presence that refuses to leave us when things fall apart. Like Sarah, we may learn that survival is not about being the strongest. It is about knowing when to let go, when to trust, and when to choose connection over pride. And when we reach the edge of our strength, faith can become the last light before dawn. Not a loud faith, not a perfect faith, but a quiet prayer whispered in the dark, asking not just for ourselves, but for those we love. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the story spoke to your heart. If you believe in standing together, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories that uplift and remind us we are not alone. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you through every storm you face. May He give you strength when you are tired, peace when you are afraid, and light when the night feels endless. If you agree with this message, comment Amen below.